Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to raving and ranting about board games, but usually more the ranting part. This is for Explorers of Navoria Beyond the Base Game. Yes, I told you that when I did my review for Explorers, and hopefully you've checked out that review first, I was then going to do the expansion in a separate video. I got all of this at the same time when I was at Essen. Again, thanks for the review copy, guys. Explorers of Navoria Forgotten Lands is the expansion to this, and yeah, you know my thoughts when it comes to expansions that are released as soon as the game is released. I'm a little bit hesitant on these because sometimes you wonder, have they been play tested enough? Have they been, have they gone through the motions enough? Is it a bit too soon to be adding more content? And if the content's good enough, why is it not in the base game to begin with? There's all sorts of reasons I've talked about with this sort of thing. You can check out the recent review I did for the Unconscious Mind expansions where I go on a bit of a rant about that. But this one looks like a pretty small box and everything just fits in your base cards. I mean, it's got a tiny bit of lift and you have to be a little bit Tetrisy with it, but for the most part you should be able to get everything from here in this box. So what does this add? Well, it adds a bunch of modules, most of which you kind of have to use at the same time, which kind of defeats the point of it being modules, but I digress. But these little modules are added to the game to add that little bit of extra meat, a little bit of extra variety, and to induce a solo mode which was not present in the base game. So I'm going to go over my thoughts as to what each module does, what the solo mode entails, and whether I think this is a recommended pickup.
You have my undivided attention.
So as I said, this game basically adds 7 modules to the game, although some of them are pretty quick to go over, and one of them is the solo mode. The one thing I was a little bit weird about though, is that it mentions, and I quote from the book here, there are 7 elements in this expansion. Elements 1 to 5 must be used together unless playing the solo mode. So you've got 7 different modules here, of which 5 of them must be used together if you are playing anything but solo mode. Okay, and then it says, note to play with a 5th player, which is the 7th module in this, you must play with elements 1 to 5. So if you play with a 5th player, or in any multiplayer game, you must play with all 5 of the first modules. Module 6 is the solo mode. So this doesn't really feel like a modular system if you're forced to use most of the modules in the same game no matter what. That just seems a little bit odd. Why even call them modules? Why not just say throw everything in and that's what you've got to do? I just found that a little bit weird, but oh well, I digress. It's kind of odd, but let's just assume they're not really modules, okay? So first off, let's get the easy one out of the way. Here's a 5th player. You can play in white. And that's all I need to say about the 5th player. Yeah, most games do not work with 5 players. This is another example of one that doesn't work well enough with 5. The game is nice and relatively short in its base game form, although it can go on a little longer when it's with 4. What do you think 5 is going to do? Now, it does try to balance things a little bit by saying that you only recruit 3 cards rather than 4 when you play with 5. So let's say that you've got to do 4 cards each with 4 players. You're doing effectively 4, 8, 12 different cards in terms of all the drafting and stuff. So if you've got 5 players, you're only doing 9. But that means I've got more people in the game to cause downtime, and I'm getting less cards. That doesn't sound fun to me. I don't want to have more downtime and yet less to do. That's just like, I don't know. Now it does kind of balance a little bit in terms of its overall game length, but you're not doing as much. You're not achieving as much. That isn't fun. Most of the times games should not have 5th player options. This is another example. Stop adhering to the focus groups with about 10 people in them that say they want 5th players, okay? It's like, no 5th player. Bad. Although, I do like playing white sometimes, so maybe that's alright. Anyway, moving on from that one. So then, next up, you've got the grey cards, and this is easily my favourite aspect of this expansion. This is another colour suit for the cards, because normally you draft like the purple, the yellow, the green, etc. Well now, you've got some grey ones, you get a new section on the board, which is all to do with these contract tokens, which are effectively another module, but these grey cards have got a little bit of a twist to them. They give you relatively powerful instant bonuses, much like the green ones, but they have no faction symbol on them. Faction symbol isn't in the corner this time. Instead, at the bottom of the card, they count as 2 of the other colours in the game. So for example, if I play, this one here, I can move 2 separate things 1 space and I get 2 victory points. but it counts as a purple and a blue card for the purposes of anything else in the game that scores from them. Think the favored tiles that score you points for having certain color cards. You know, think some of the other like things that like score based on color. This will apply for both. So it is kind of interesting that you do sometimes get that choice of like, oh, I do want the bonus and it would be good for the colors, but I could use a faction symbol right now. It's nice to have just another bit of variety in the game. They're not difficult to use, but they do use contract tokens, which means you are going to need those contract tokens in the game. You can't just throw this in without any of the other modules. Would have liked maybe, you know, just to be able to throw this in without even caring, but yeah, it's nice to have more variety, and it's easily the thing that if I had a choice to make everything modular, I would throw in without a second thought.
The problem is choice.
So next up, you've got the exploration tiles, which is literally just 6 little tiles. That is all this is. Do you remember that you got so many victory points for first, second, and third place when you were on the tracks before? Well, now you shuffle this little deck, you draw 3 at random, put them on each track, and now there's a different first, second, third place reward. That is literally all they do. Unfortunately, they all kind of look and feel pretty much the same. You know, there's not a lot of difference between them. Essentially what they do is that they will give you victory points kind of like as a base, but typically they'll give you VP for having red cards. So you'll get maybe 1 VP, but then you'll get 1 for every, or 1 or 2 for every red card you've got. I suspect this was put in to kind of balance the red cards a bit, because some people didn't normally like to take red cards early in the base game, and for that I approve. It does make red cards a little bit more interesting to take early with this expansion. But then a lot of the times they just get you contract tokens, and so, you know, you've got that aspect. The other problem is that if you're not taking red cards in the game, sometimes you find that the first, second, third place reward for these is negligible and trivial for you. Everybody likes getting VP in general, but here, most of the VP is generated by way of the contract tokens, and we'll pick that one up later. But, you know, this is a relatively small thing in the game, and, you know, you can throw it in easily enough, but as I say, I like the idea that it makes red cards a bit more interesting, but that's kind of all it's for. So next up, you've got these goal cards, these end of round objectives, which is one of the easiest things to throw into an expansion. Barely takes a moment's thought. But these I'm not as keen on. There's not a huge amount of variety. I mean, there's literally only 6 of them. There's only so many ways to score in a game. But also, what happens is that they're all revealed at the start of the game, and they've all got criteria of 3 different levels, and they'll give you more VP the higher the tier you do. But the problem is that you only score the leftmost one in round 1, then you score the next one in round 2, then the next one in round 3. But these criteria are pretty much impossible to do except in the round that they're flipped. So for example, this one here requires you to get cards of the same colour in front of you. 3, 4, or 5. It is very difficult without another module in this game to get 4 in front of you of the same colour in round 1. It is impossible to do it with 5. But 3 is pretty much all you're doing. So if this turns up in round 1, you're only aiming for the top tier. You just ignore the other 2 tiers. But then later on, you know, with some of these, like getting so many of the favors, right, okay, now you can aim for the 15-point one. But it kind of just makes you want to, I don't know, I don't feel like diversifying with these is particularly good. So what most people do is they just ignore the first couple of rounds entirely and go straight for the 12, 15-point one at the very end. Because getting 3, 3, and 2 from these objectives, which is only worth 8, is harder to do because you're having to, at various times, diversify a bit, rather than just simply going, well, okay, I will just simply try to get 5 cards of the same colour in front of me during the game and I'll get 12 points. I get more points than you, who diversified, and I had an easier time doing it. It just, I don't know, they're a very small addition, and honestly, I don't even think you need to throw these in, because it claims you should throw these in with the other modules if you're playing with, you know, anything but solo mode, but really, this isn't needed. It's just kind of just there. I could take this out of the game, and it wouldn't affect anything else, and no one would even notice, so it's almost just a negligible module in this. Alright, next up we've then got the species tokens. So these are pretty minor. Basically, you shuffle these up, one goes out at random on the 3 different tracks, and they reward you with a contract token if you get to them, as well as the faction symbol on the token to contribute to things like favors and stuff. That's all they are. It's just another incentive to get to the very end of the track, as if the treasure points that you got weren't a big enough attraction. I mean, how much more attraction do you need to get to the end of a thing? But, I don't know, it's fine. But again, it's almost trivial. I mean, you could take this out of the game and it wouldn't make a difference. So I don't get why a bunch of these need to be thrown into the game together. Because these are unrelated. You don't desperately need these, you don't desperately need these. It's just because they've got the contract symbol on them that it's kind of half required. But it does seem a little bit odd. But as I say, it's a really minor thing. You wouldn't even notice it if it wasn't really there.
Is that it?
So now we get on to the most impactful part here, the contract tokens. These come out mainly via the grey cards, as well as the grey action space that you put on as an overlay. But you got these chunky resource tokens that are used, and basically they are mostly for powering these. So at the start of the game, you've got a unique player power and a unique skill. And you basically, in typical Snake Drafty fashion, draft a faction and a skill tile before the game starts. So the skills, these basically have you spend contract tokens as you want once in a round at certain phases to get a bonus. But, you know, and these kind of vary. I mean, you can draw an extra tile out of the bag when you're choosing. You can swap a card in your display with one from the tableau on there. You can just get yourself a resource. You can move on 2 different tracks. You know, you can build yourself a trading post. You can get a bunch of resources and a point, you know, and they vary in terms of how many contracts they cost. These are fine. I do find them quite cool. You know, it's nice to have some kind of unique ability, but if you're not getting contract tokens, you're kind of wasting them. It really does make you want to get these contract tokens, mainly because these abilities are bloody useful, and some of them are definitely a bit more useful than others. I mean, being able to swap a card from where you've got with the display is rarely that useful. Occasionally you can create some weird janky reason for doing it, but for the most part I barely want to use that ability. The whole drawing 1 extra out of the bag and having a choice out of 3 is nice and all, but again, you're still looking at the gods of luck. Just simply getting any resource of your choice though, twice in a round with 1 contract each, is incredibly useful because you are triggering your powers on your board far more often with this ability. But then being able to move on different tracks, as well as, you know, moving on multiple tracks and building trading posts, yeah, they may require 3 contracts a piece, but there are times where you can just be swimming in these things and it doesn't matter too much. I much rather get one of those skill token tiles than any of the ones that just let me draw an extra one out of the bag. I find those ones just to be a little bit underpowered compared to the rest. But that being said, this I don't mind as much. These, on the other hand, are a little bit less so. You basically get some unique startup or ability before the game starts, which is nice. I mean, it's nice to have some extra beforehand, but it does vary a lot as to what they are. I mean, they mostly, they tend to get you like a card of a type. So he gets a green, he gets a yellow, he gets a grey, he gets a red, you know, and that's about it. But then they might get you a contract token on each. So that's all these ones are. It's just basically, I start with a card of a particular type. Okay, cool. I mean, it's a slightly accelerated setup. You're probably going to score more points in games with these in use. But then you've got some here where I'm a little bit more questionable about their balance. I mean, this one starts you off with 3 contract tokens. You can start off with contract tokens with the other ones, and honestly, 3 contract tokens? I'd rather start off with an entire card. That's far more useful. But a couple of these are just garbage. I mean, this one here, 1 contract token, and in the last round of the game, like the achievements that you can score, you get an extra point if you match them. That's it, an extra point for each achievement. Whoop-de-friggin' do. And then you got this one here. You win tiebreakers in like the track movement. Not bad. That may or may not be a factor, and if you reach the end of a track, you get +1 to the value of whatever it is the treasure chest worth of points. Again, that requires you to get to the very end of a track, which is not something you're going to do on a regular basis. So this one just seems very situational along with this one. I'm not the biggest fan of using these because they can create some pretty powerful scenarios, particularly with the faction token one. But if I am going to use these, I'm going to literally just use probably these 5. Maybe I'll use the faction head one. Maybe I'll use the free contract token one in and again. But honestly, I think I would just rather use these 5. The ones that start you off with a particular color of card and maybe get you a contract token depending on what color it is. These seem to be the most balanced and I would certainly use these more often. But again, yeah, you know, balance is questionable. And if you are just using these 5, like I probably will be, well, it doesn't add a huge amount of variety to the game. You're basically just deciding, well, which colour card would I like to start the game with? So why are we snake drafting it? Why don't we just shuffle it up and dish it out at random? Wouldn't that just make more sense?
Is this a trick question?
Let's talk briefly about the solo mode. Now, the solo mode is mostly a beat your own score while meeting an objective, which is kind of the solo mode I do tend to prefer. It's nice to have an AI opponent at times, but sometimes they can get too complicated, too much to pilot, and they're just a bit like, bit little fiddly. And obviously I didn't want the game to just be beat your own score, but this one doesn't have an AI. You are basically with you and the map and the various like extra solo components, which is not much. It's mainly just a couple of extra cards and some tokens on the map. Although when you're playing this as a solo game, when you've got that entire map with all the cards, like the grey cards and all that, as well as the contract tokens and the bag and everything, it is quite a table hog for a solo game, that must be said, but you know, for most people you should be fine. So the solo mode is essentially 5 different chapters. You can play them one after the other, whatever. There's no real story here. There's like a blurb as each chapter progresses, as if you care. But the idea is that you will essentially go through each chapter. You have to get 110 points while meeting an objective. And if you can get more points, you're just ranked higher. So whatever. I just like to meet the objective. But what you have in addition is you have one of 8 different solo side quest cards, which essentially gives you some extra like sort of ability that you gain, some benefit you can have if you meet the criteria during it. So, you know, if you can have like one of every card color, you can be rewarded with 2 resources and 3 points. You know, it's just like a, like I say, it's a side quest. While you're trying to do the main stuff, you try to aim for one of these, and ideally you should be. And then you also have these coloured cards. These represent difficulty cards. And the idea with these is that you basically tailor the game to what it is you're playing. So you can play these 5 scenarios with any one of these 5 different cards, which adds a little bit of replay value. But mainly it just adds a particular endgame scoring condition for that colour card. You know, not a massive difference. A skill, which you can trigger, again, based on the colour of the card. I mean, the green one will get you resources, the purple lets you move more, the blue lets you mess around with and tokens. You know, they're usually related to their colour. And then a difficulty rating of easy, medium, or hard, which rewards you with something before the game starts, even though the rulebook doesn't actually tell you this. And this is kind of the main beat for the solo mode. The rules are pretty sparse, and I mean sparse. You've literally got that page there to explain the solo mode. That is it. And clearly they needed more space because you've got the different chapters in all the following pages that have the additional setup, some additional rules, and a chapter objective. So you can pick or choose which of the scenarios you just like playing more, or you can play all 5 of them in a row. Doesn't really matter. There's no real campaign in this. But, you know, the solo mode bit is literally just this with some extra iconography. It's a little bit vague as to exactly how to interpret the difficulty cards when you don't have the bit explaining what the top bit means. I mean, you can assume that it means get those bonuses when the game starts, but the rules do not mention this small fact, and it's a relatively big thing to miss out. But these tokens here basically grant you a reward, and so when you have a particular chapter, let's take one for example, the first one, chapter 1, you place a solo token on each exploration track with a flag. Okay, fine. So you dish a bunch of these out at random, so the exclamation mark is all out, and then you flip them over, or you don't even have to flip them over, keep them secret if you want. And the idea is that when you meet the objective, you take the token and you get the reward. And so the objective for the scenario might be, for example, in chapter 1, all exploration markers must be on space 3 or further on each track by the end of the round 3. And you must have claimed at least 6 of these solo tokens. Okay, cool. So get 110 points, claim 6 tokens, get a reasonable space, get a reasonable distance on each track. You know, very simple objectives to meet, and it just gives you a way to play this game solo. This is fine. I mean, I think it's better to play this game multiplayer than it is solo, and I probably wouldn't say that, you know, for what solo mode there is here. I mean, it is basically just 5 games, mostly the same, it just slightly tweaks your objective. You know, I don't think I would want to tell people to buy the base game and the expansion just to get the solo mode for this if they've no intention of playing it multiplayer. The solo mode is not substantial enough to warrant buying both sets on top of each other. It's just a nice harmless addition into a game that didn't previously have a solo mode. So all in all, you've got a bunch of little modules, most of which have to be used at the same time, and it is very hit and miss as to what I think of each module. Some I like more than others. Will I play this game solo? Yeah, every now and again I'd get this one out and play the solo mode, pick a chapter and see if I can do it. The rules would be very simple, and it would just be those nice, simple, elegant, smooth rules that I mentioned before. But I don't know, I feel like I want a little bit more of that competition with the other players, because you're only going to recruit so many cards yourself, and then you do the worker placement aspect. But with multiplayer, you'd have more tokens available, it'd be more congestion for the cards, and then you've got the congestion for the worker spaces as well. The multiplayer is better than the solo mode overall. And with the other modules, I'm less keen on the player powers, but the skills are not bad, even though I think a couple of the powers are definitely not as useful as others. The end of round bonuses can take or leave. The end of round goals, take or leave. But again, I just don't think they're particularly useful or good, so I would pretty much just leave them out. Species tokens, whatever, that's such a minor thing. And that's kind of the biggest problem with this expansion, is that it doesn't really impact the game enough to, be something that I would go like goo goo gaga, I've got to get. The biggest impact here is the solo mode if you want to play it solo, and the skill and contracts and the black cards. But the other little bits are just really not like negligible, trivial little things that I just wouldn't really even notice if you didn't put them in the expansion. But something's got to justify the cost, I guess. So it's an okay expansion. I like some of the bits in it. Some of the bits I'm not as big a fan of. I'd probably give this one at best a 6 out of 10. It's an above average expansion if you're interested in playing it solo and you want a little bit of extra variety with the cards and the powers. If you're not going to play this solo though at all, this is a 5, possibly even lower. It loses a whole point if you're not going to play this solo, and I don't even think this would be, even for the extra variety in the skill tokens, I don't think the cost justifies its purchase if you don't intend to play it solo. There just simply isn't enough in the box to really justify the price point. So for me, I think overall Explorers of Navoria is perfectly fine in its base game form. Yes, I will miss the grey cards, but it's not the biggest end of the world. It's still plenty enough to do in the base game. The other little bits, again, I could take or leave most of them. There is nothing in here that I would say is an auto must include on pain of death. There's just some I prefer more than others. So if you're interested in just testing out this game, just stick with the base set for now. Consider the expansion if you want to play it solo, if you're really desperate to add everything in the kitchen sink into this game, but otherwise, you could probably skip the expansion for a fair while. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Check out, of course, the original review I did for Explorers of Navoria, to see what you think. And, of course, the rest of the Essence content aside. But also let me know your thoughts on the various different modules of this expansion. If you've already got it, what do you think of solo? What do you think of the skill tiles, the faction tiles, the end of round goals? Which ones did you like and dislike out of this lot? So take care, and remember, regardless of whether you wish to explore Navoria alone or with other players, it's still only a game. So bye for now.